So let's have a little Northern Lights round of applause for Dana Bourgeois.
Well, thank you so much for coming out tonight. And thank you for Northern Lights for having such a nice shop and having our guitars in it, and for hosting this nice event. So what I'm going to try to do tonight is tell you a little bit about guitar building. I think it's the most important part, the most important ingredient that goes into a guitar, and it's what we call voicing. Some people call it tuning the top. Tuning. We also voice the back. It's not quite as critical as voicing the top. Someday I'll write a book on guitar building if I live long enough, but it really will take a full book to sort of explain everything that goes into it. But I think we can do a little demonstration of what it is that's done when the braces are shaped that makes the top into a musical instrument, or the most important part of the musical instrument. I'm going to start off with a little slideshow here. I'll try to blast through this. I put together the slideshow for, I've done this demonstration a number of times now, most recently at a guitar making school in Belgium. And some of it gets a little wonky at the end, and I'll try to spare you the wonkiest parts of it. But I think there's stuff in here that that will help explain kind of what goes into voicing a top. Well, let's give it a go and see what happens. So, start out with a model, sort of a mechanical model of kind of what happens, sort of what's going on in a guitar. A guitar is a series of coupled oscillators, coupled vibrating things. Basically, you start out with strings vibrating. The strings will excite the top. The top vibrates, and it excites a column of air inside the guitar, which sets up sound pressure waves, which strike your ear. So that's how you hear music. We'll break that down a little bit, and the string, a string is capable of vibrating in a variety of modes. You think of a string as you pluck a string and it does this kind of thing, but it's also it also divides in half, and then in thirds and fourths and fifths, and these are essentially called vibration modes, or later on we'll see how they translate to overtones. The important thing to understand is that the string vibrates in these various modes simultaneously. A string is a pure oscillator in the sense that it's capable of producing many modes at the same time. The string, in space is a camera can record very high number of vibrational modes. When you begin to connect it to a top, you're actually putting those modes through a filter, essentially. The top is capable of also vibrating in a variety of modes, but it depends on how you build it, and that's what we're going to get into. This is an illustration of a round plate that shows the various modes. The first, second, third, on and on. There, I'm not going to get too much into the technical part of that. This is a guitar top, classical guitar top, an illustration of a top that shows that the top actually vibrates in those modes. Again, important to understand that the top will vibrate in in whatever modes it can vibrate in, will vibrate in these modes simultaneously. So if you look at number A, the belly of the top is just going up and down. If you look at B, the belly is kind of doing this kind of thing side to side. Well, it's doing this kind of thing side to side while it's going up and down, kind of thing. And then C, it dishes front to back, and all of these things are going on simultaneously. And of course, these graphics are exaggerated. the guitar does not distort anywhere near that amount. This is a hologram image that's showing the vibrational modes. These can be shown various different ways. The hologram is actually heat sensitive, and motion gives off heat, friction. So the hologram is calibrated to like very small percentage of a degree Fahrenheit or Celsius or whatever, but it's very, very finely calibrated. You've probably seen hologram photos of a house in wintertime losing heat, you know, through the windows and the doors and wherever. And so that would be, that would be calibrated to several degrees or whatever, tens of degrees. These are just very fine fraction of a degree of heat given off. And here's another way of actually visualizing the way a top vibrates. This top was sprinkled with glitter. It was just little mylar, particles, and then blasted from above with the speaker cone, and with a variable frequency, and you can see this is probably the first mode, or maybe that's the second mode. See, I'm not into the physics part of it so much, and I'll show you why a little bit later. I kind of boil it down to something much simpler than understanding the physics. But the point is, the note at which it vibrates at that particular pattern will tell you how the top is tuned. Not only does the string and the top and the air column vibrate, but when you glue the top to a body, and you make a guitar body or a violin body, the whole body goes into a vibrational mode. And this was discovered by some violin researchers. A lot of this research has been done in the violin field first, back in the 50s. Hutchins and Saunders published a lot of this information. Saunders was a physicist at Harvard, and Hutchins was a high school physicist who built guitars, and they worked together and they did a lot of experiments, and they figured out an awful lot of the mechanics of how violins work, and a lot of it is just directly transferable to guitars. But one of the things that they found out was that the first vibrational mode of a guitar or a violin is the top wrapping around the sides, wrapping around the front and the back, and then the back is wrapping around the sides, kind of like the skin of a baseball, and it's moving like this. And then the second vibrational mode is just moved 90 degrees, and they were not able to measure anything beyond that. This is an illustration of the vibration of air inside a cavity. This happens to be a tube. This is probably a pipe organ or a flute or something like that. And it's fixed at one end. And as you can see, once again, the air inside the cavity vibrates according to given patterns at different resonant frequencies. And again, these things happen simultaneously. The first mode, second, third, fourth, and so on are all happening again simultaneously. In theory, that's what you want to happen. This will illustrate what we mean by sound pressure waves. If you hold a string in front of a loudspeaker, it'll actually push and pull the piece of string. So a little illustration of the kind of disturbances in the air that are made by this air coming out of the cavity that eventually strikes your ear and makes wonderful music. So I'll go again to our simple model of coupled oscillators. But it's actually more complicated than that, because a lot of the elements of the guitar are interactive. In this particular model, the strings excite the top, which excites the air column, which excites the body, which excites the top again. So this going back and forth, and eventually it comes out as sound pressure waves. And this is what I call the Rick Turner model, and he's expanded it even farther. Everything is interactive with everything else, which is probably true to some degree. But it was kind of fun to diagram that out. So now we're going to get to the harmonics. This is a graph of a harmonic content of a sample piano note. So remember when I said a string will vibrate in the first mode and in the second mode and in the third mode and dividing up. You're sort of hearing these harmonics all at the same time. The strength and the relative shape of these harmonics is kind of what gives you a characteristic sound of a certain instrument. And for example, we'll just look at a piano. This is like one note on a piano. It was like maybe a middle C, and it was supposed to be a good piano. This is an example of like what a good piano note looks like. The first and the second are very strong. After that, they're considerably less strong, but there's an awful lot of them. We're going to go out to the 10th harmonic, and then we're missing a couple, and there's even something out here at the 13th harmonic. So it's a very piano note. We talk about a piano like, a good guitar having a piano-like tone. And what that means is that it's very complex. For example, here's a couple of a flute, again, a couple of strong harmonics, a violin, quite a few strong harmonics, but very complex tone, and a tuning fork. You only get one harmonic. I mean, a tuning fork gives you a very sterile note that's devoid of higher partials. This is a little graph I made of the note C, and I probably should have put the second line first, but these are, if you were to name a note associated with the first, second, third, fourth harmonic, on and on, it would be C, G, C, on and on, and the frequency ratio is the 1 to 2, 1 to 1, 1 to 2. It's like analogous to that string dividing in halves, thirds, fourths, etc. What's interesting is at the bottom is the interval. The interval between C and C is 1, between C and C is 1, between C and G is 5. You get all the way up to the 6th harmonic, and you essentially have 1, 3, and 5, which is a major triad. Interestingly enough, many guitars don't go beyond that. In terms of audible, many guitar notes don't go much beyond 6 harmonics. Good ones will go farther. But so if you're getting some oddball, some sort of dissonant intervals in your harmonics, like sevenths and firsts, then you know that you're getting, into sort of like, sort of again a more complex guitar tone. Another little graph that I made, along the left-hand side, I have the notes A, B, C, D, E, F. Those are the white keys. I didn't bother to graph out the flats and sharps. And along the top, I have the harmonics. So basically, you have the notes that represent the first 16 harmonics in each of these notes, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. So remember I talked about the top being a filter. The string will vibrate purely for many, many harmonics that can be measured. The top will only amplify a certain number, and it depends on how you tune it. The objective then is to tune the top in a way that it will amplify as many harmonics as possible and as many different keys. Okay? So here's what it would look like. Here's what your notes would look like. Your notes A, B, C, D, E, F, and G would look like if your top or your body were only capable of vibrating at one resonant frequency. Just pick A. So that one note A would be extremely strong, and as you go down, D would be strong because you'd have the second harmonic would be represented, but you get down here to C, you know, you don't get anything represented until you get to the 13th harmonic, and so very, very sketchy notes. An interesting thing is that your ear will fill in if a note is strong enough and has enough harmonics. There may be some gaps in there. Your ear will fill them in, and in fact, most guitars do not have a resonant frequency as low as the open E. You're mostly hearing the second harmonic when you're hearing an open E. So your ear can fill in an awful lot. This is what notes look like with 4 resonant frequencies. As you can see, these notes begin to fill in a lot more. They're stronger. The ear should be able to hear and recognize all of these notes if you had just simply 4 strong harmonics. That's just a good example. To me, I thought that was a great way to visualize how some of that stuff works. So let's get on to voicing objectives. When I'm voicing a guitar, there's a few things that I'm looking for. The top stiffness and mass should roughly be in balance with the string load. What do I mean by that? If it's a ukulele, you have a low string tension. If it's an acoustic guitar, you know, long scale, medium, made to be played with medium gauge strings, the string load, the top should be stiff enough to be balanced with the load that's put on it. And so on the one hand, I have a cinder block. So imagine a cinder block strung up under 180 pounds of string pressure. It's not going to be very resonant, you know, because it's going to take a lot to move it. On the other hand, you got a piece of paper. Well, that's, you know, that is too flexible. You're not going to get a piece of paper to vibrate in all of those complex modes that are going to give you a wonderful guitar sound. In the middle, we have a braced guitar top made out of spruce, and that's what we're looking for. So you're looking for some kind of a happy medium. There's probably no one precise stiffness, but you probably have a parabola here, and you want to get somewhere up here in the parabola. Here's a good example of a stiffness tester. A lot of mandolin makers are using this kind of a device to actually measure the load on a specific top. Violin makers have done this for quite a while. This is just a little lever that pulls down, and that's a fish scale. so you can pull down on the lever. And I think a later one has a way of locking that. This is Dan McCrosty's. He wants to find out how much deflection he gets at the bridge under 25 pounds of pressure, which is approximately what a set of mandolin strings tuned up will deliver. And here's someone else's method, similar thing, you know, with a sandbag for a load. We were at Collings Guitars and Mandolins earlier this year, and they have a similar device. So at optimum stiffness, the top should produce, this is my second objective, once you build that top to the optimum stiffness, the top should produce as many different resonant frequencies as possible. Why is that? Because you want the note B flat to be full and not to be weak. You know, the objective is you want to be able to play every note on that fingerboard and have good presence and good balance. And you know, you're never going to, you'd have to build a synthesizer to be able to get every single note as full as you want it. And then it would be a synthesizer and not a guitar. But, so it's never going to be perfect, but you want to get as much as you can. This is an example. And 3, ideally, all the resonant frequencies should be equally strong. This is a response graph on an app on my iPhone for a $10 app, and you can simply just play the guitar, and it tells you how strong the output is, and it's set to hold the highest note. So I'm playing, and I'm just playing and playing and playing, and those little peaks keep building and building. But the fretboard, the notes on the fretboard are from about 96 hertz to around 1K. So it's so those peaks, and this was a good guitar. This was Courtney Hartman's Brazilian Dread, when it was brand new. So those peaks represent the major resonant frequencies in that guitar. As they are filtered through the top and the characteristics of the sound chamber, of the air cavity. So am I making sense here? Is this all kind of, I'm not losing anyone? I haven't gotten too wonky yet. So, number 4, tap tones. A tap tone is when you tap on the top here. We'll be doing that. A tap tone should be complex, pleasing, and musical. What do I mean by that? I started looking at, on the internet, at various other musical instrument makers and how they tune instruments. And one area where there's a lot of information is marimba making. Marimba makers try to tune each key not only to a note but to at least 3 overtones. And some people will do more and claim to do more or whatever, and they have a very specific method of doing it. So if I just kind of get a note out of this thing when I'm tapping it, holding it and tapping it in a certain area, that note is, it's great to get a note, but it's even better to get a note that's musical and full. And what I mean by that is that particular note has associated overtones that it's capable of generating just because of the way the bracing is shaped. Sets of marimba bars, you can see they're scooped out. They have they look a little bit different in size. The lower bars are the lower notes and the higher bars are the higher notes. Here's a little thing that just simply shows you can adjust the fundamental by the scoop. In the middle, the 4th harmonic can be adjusted by the areas 2, and then the 10th harmonic can be adjusted by the areas indicated by the 3, and so on. Again, I'm not so much interested in the physics of it as I am interested in the illustration that this can be done. And it's done systematically. And even, I always used to think that if you remove wood, you'll always lower the pitch. If something gets more flexible, you lower the pitch, and that often happens. But there are ways of actually raising the pitch by, like for example, in a marimba bar, so you play around with you play around with the voicing too much, and then the fundamental goes out. If you want to, it gets too low by you scooped out too much, so you've changed the fundamental pitch. Well, you can bring it back by taking a little bit off the end here. So there's little ways of doing these things. And what I want to show you is that these scalloped braces are nothing but marimba bars. is. Couple of things. This we're getting a little wonky here, so I'll blast through this. This is an out of phase waveform. You will be tapping this, and you'll hear the same notes a lot in here. If you get two notes that are out of phase, what happens? They cancel. So sometimes, if you're just trying to make a fuller sounding top, just by changing something, you've gone from two notes that are actually canceling each other to two separate notes, and all of a sudden it gets very full. That explains why you can remove a little bit of wood, and all of a sudden it sounds fantastic. And then there's another phenomenon here. It's called beating. And how many mandolin players out there? What happens when your two E strings are not quite in tune? They sound nasty because they're beating. And that can also happen when you're voicing a guitar. Two notes that are too close to each other can give you just a nasty sound. And so that's, just experience tells you, when to separate those two notes by voicing, but it's one of the things that we try to do. Voicing method. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to flex the top along and across the grain and evaluate its stiffness and its weight. I'm going to hold and tap from a variety of locations and evaluate the frequency distribution. And then I'm going to shape the braces, regularly evaluating stiffness and frequency distribution. And my voicing is complete when the top is springy equally along and across the grain and at the edges of the top. Now by springy I mean it is the top is the right stiffness for the string load, and that's kind of a thing that we could measure that with the with a weight or something. But if you build enough of these things, you can measure it this way too. It's complete when frequency distribution is optimized for the top and for the chosen design, and when the tap tones are strong, clear, and musical. Probably stop there. I got a couple of other things, but that describes what I'm going to try to do. I'll get back to here so you can look at a picture of a guitar top. So I brought along a couple guitar tops. I'm going to make a mess now. These are OM tops. I was looking at this one trying to figure out why this one is supposed to be a reject. I'm not sure. This one has a big old stain that we sanded into, and it'd make a great sunburst, and it might still. I'm going to try to voice one of these tops. I usually bring two because when I'm done carving away at one, then we have a basis of comparison before and after if I bring two of them. So I'm just going to randomly pick that one. I have two little finger planes. I have one curved chisel, and I have some hard foam with a heavy sandpaper on it. We have a bunch of these with various grits of sandpaper. I'm going to take this top 80% of the way. I'm not going to try to finish it with all of you folks watching me and this and being videotaped here. I'm going to finish it in the quiet, in the din of my own shop, which I'm used to hearing a certain amount of noise or whatever. At any rate, I should be able to take it fairly quickly to a point where you all can hear the difference, and that's my objective. And I'll try to explain as I go along. Let me just pass this around. Maybe you don't want to flex too hard. So a couple of things that we do: we select the wood for the model and for the specific guitar, and then we thickness the tops for stiffness along the grain. In an X-brace system, we use a Martin style X-brace system for all our guitars. Wood, you can test the stiffness along and across the grain, but all the damn braces are diagonal. So the one thing that you can actually affect the stiffness this way by the way you shape these side braces quite a bit, but there's nothing from here to here bracing the guitar. So the actual piece of top is thicknessed by how stiff it is along the grain. Sometimes on the outside here it's very stiff, sometimes it's very floppy. We do a lot of adjustment with these little braces here. So I'm just going to pass this around. You get an idea of what sort of my starting point. These braces are made shaped on a shaper and glued in place, and then we trim the ends with a little sanding machine that makes, you know, they end up 60,000ths of an inch deep so that they sit into mortises in the lining. So first thing I'm going to do is just trim away the brace ends. I'll use a variety of, I hope I don't do too much violence to the repair pad here. I'm just going to trim away these brace ends and get them a little bit closer to what I consider the starting point for voicing. We're going to be doing a little bit more of this on the CNC and using less shapers in the next year, and hopefully I'll be able to work on guitars that, you know what I should have done before I started? I should do some tapping so you can hear. Usually I don't tap until I'm halfway into it, but so the objective would be to hold and tap anywhere and get wonderful sounding full notes and get a variety of different tones. But let's just, you can hear some different notes there. Kind of a bunch of the same notes. There's a nice one, a full note. That's what I mean by a full note. There's another nice full note. So we got a little bit of variety here, but there's difference in quality of the notes, and it's too damn stiff. So I've got to in order for that guitar to be lively, mechanically lively, I've got to get it to the right stiffness. But as I'm working it down to that stiffness, I've got to make sure I keep a good distribution. And I'm just quickly removing material that just isn't going to be there on any guitar. You guys can probably mostly see what I'm working on here. I would never work at a table that low, you know, but it's good. I can handle doing just one guitar this way. At the end of the day, the X brace and the upper transverse bar will tie into the lining, and the ends of these braces here will just kind of feather away to nothing and tuck under the lining. Now, these peaks are a little on the high side for an OM. These are both OM tops. The peaks are a little high because we use dreadnought braces. We already have about, it seems like we've got 30 different shaper jigs to make these braces, and this is why I want to go to the CNC. So we put dreadnought braces on OMs, and then we carve them down to OM sizes before voicing. That's kind of... How many body sizes do we make, James?
I think 16?
Something like that. So that's a lot of different braces. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do, now I'm sort of getting kind of close to the zone of where I would start with if I made OM braces. Actually, let's take these guys down. There's another part of my, I think I will go on to the next part of my slideshow. See these three cross sections? Those three cross sections are all capable of carrying the same load. The triangular cross section is about almost a third lighter than the rectangular cross section. So we want the top to be light enough to vibrate freely. So most braces are triangularly shaped. You can remove an awful lot of wood and no one makes like a real sharp triangle except Gibson because you can cut them on a table saw. Most braces are more like a parabola kind of shape, so that's where they ended up, which is a lot closer to the triangle than it is to the rectangle. So that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to take a bunch of these braces and I'm going to just thin them out a little bit and turn them into a little more of a triangular cross section. Basically all of this stuff that I'm removing isn't going to affect the stiffness that much. Okay. Sharpen these things before I left, and I didn't get to reset the planes. Is there a wastebasket I can just like throw stuff away? Okay, great. So, we're almost close to what I would consider a good starting spot here. I'm always doing this kind of thing at my bench. So by the way, we make 8 guitars a week, and I have a helper, and I can voice 8 guitars in about 4 hours, both the tops and the backs. The backs we do kind of the same way. It's a lot simpler, but we're still trying to get a good, lively, complex kind of tone. I don't know if you remember what it sounded like earlier, but I think it's going to sound a little different. Quite a bit of variety there. There's some what I call the black keys on the piano. Those sevenths and firsts and those weird intervals from whatever the major resonant frequency is. So more musicality, still a good variety. Not all the notes are equal in musicality, but we're still stiff. So I haven't really done too much side to side here. Actually, it's a little flexible down here, a little less up here. I'm going to do a little more to these side braces. Mostly because I haven't taken them down far enough. Right here and here. So, some braces, some of these are called side braces or finger braces. Some finger braces are taller and they have a peak here, and then they just kind of go down to one side and go down the other side. The problem is you can't really affect, you can have a lot more control over stiffness if you have a long barrel here and scoop from either end. You know, you can Sometimes we do a lot of scooping. Sometimes we do a lot of scooping on one end, not so much on the other. But I also am interested in how flexible everything is right at the very edge here. This one is still a little tall. And I just feel like I can have a lot more control over that flexibility and balance the side to side to the front to back with a different kind of brace. Now, what I'm going to do with this side brace is I'm going to make it smaller. This guy is not quite so sharp as I had hoped. That's what. Let's flex it again. Starting to be pretty good here toward the edges. A little stiff there still. Overall. And the other thing that I'm looking for is asymmetry. Asymmetry promotes frequency distribution. So this is your treble side. This is your bass side. The treble side should be stiffer than the bass side. You see there's a lot, these braces come into here, and there's a lot going on. So your top is actually kind of almost, you know, let me see, pivoting like that. So this one doesn't have to be as stiff as this one. I often take that one down a bit. These I keep pretty short. The ones on the bass side I make longer. I want a little more flexibility on this side. Let's see. Feel it. Yeah, a little more. I'm getting close. Let's see what we got here. So can you hear the progression from when we started before, thunk, 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 to quite a bit of distribution and a lot more musicality? And, you know, stiffness-wise, we're kind of in the range. I'm going to say we're about, as I say, I've got maybe 75% there. I'll play a little bit more with these peaks. I'll play a little bit more with the, you know, with turning these braces into more of a triangular form, just tapping and flexing as I go. Generally, when I stop making improvements, that's about when I stop, you know, and hopefully I don't go back in the other direction. I usually use this kind of brace or this kind of sanding tool when I'm done, you know, to do that kind of thing. You can use that edge of it. And then for these scoops here, you know, you can get right in there and clean out these scoops, because the lining will actually go over the edge of that. It's almost wants to be feather small. There we have it. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Northern Lights.
Yeah, thanks Dana. Thanks for everyone for coming. If you want to stick around for
yeah.
a few minutes and
Yeah.
talk and see what's going on.